and welcome here today with Under the Influence podcast. We're joined here with a special guest. I've been really excited for this one since we agreed to do this. We're joined here by a close friend of mine outside of work, Mike. I've known Mike for several years now. I've known him as a father. I've known him as a mad scientist. I've known him as the business owner. I've known him as a nutritionist. I've known him as the gym freak. I've known him in many different roles in life. And there's one part of his life that I do want to focus on today, and which I've known him at, and that's the side where Mike had some issues and struggles around addiction. And we speak a lot in general outside of here, but today I wanted to sort of allow him to have the space to talk about his life and what sort of led him in the path of life from being a successful businessman to where he is today. And so I'm going to throw out my first question that I generally have here for you, Mike, and it's just sort of, what has happened in your life? What's been going on from sort of being young to your addiction? I'm quite really interested in that, which I've not heard so much about yet.
So what are you more interested in? What led up to the point of sort of having addiction issues, I guess, right?
Yeah, so just in general, I'm quite interested in the things that we don't really talk about when we sat there conversating, and
Sure.
and how being so successful in your life, which I always seen as being hyper successful, and then I seen you sometimes at your worst, and sort of how that happened and how you got there.
Interesting question. So I mean, right from the beginning, as you know, like a lot of people, grew up on a council estate, didn't finish school, so that was kind of the start, right? Like rocky start, as maybe you might expect, not too surprising. There's definitely a pattern there with these sorts of things. But I mean, in terms of immediately what, like that beginning actually always served as motivation for me, So I didn't finish school, but I did go to college. I didn't finish college, I quit.
Yep.
But I did ultimately end up in university, and actually I have 3 different degrees, at a master's level as well. and I always used my upbringing as motivation. The most motivating thing to me has always been when people think I can't do something. As soon as somebody tells me you can't do it, I'm not sure what it is, it's just automatic. Everything inside just says, okay, I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
I will show you what I can do. I remember first going to university as an undergrad, and, I did sports science as an undergrad, science degree. And, for a kid that grew up on a council estate, didn't finish school, no GCSEs, no A-levels, no education of any kind, to be in an undergraduate degree on a sports science degree, having to read, the first assignment was like to read all these research papers.
Yeah.
And honestly, I spent multiple hours just translating the words. Just sat in the library for 2 hours at the end of the day, just translating the words on Google. Okay, they've said this, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And then I'd write it down, and then I'd just keep going and keep going and keep going. And I was determined to prove, because when I had the interview for that course, I remember the lecturer that interviewed me, she told me that I would struggle. She said, look, you've not finished school, you don't have A-levels. Everybody has A-levels in this program. You don't, you're going to struggle. Why don't you do the HND, which is just more assignment-based?
Yep.
And that stuck in my head. It definitely stuck in my head, and I just thought, I'll show you. And that's still the same now, and it's always been the case. So, obviously went through university. I've had multiple jobs, worked for the NHS several times, and as you've said, I've built multiple different businesses, all of which have been various levels of successful. And that's always been the motivation, really, rather than the money or anything else that comes with it. It's just, I want to prove to everybody, and that probably is a result of my upbringing or whatever, because, we can say, well, nobody's judging you, and they're probably not for the most part, but I just have that in inside. But I mean, in terms of what ultimately led me into having issues, you know, with alcohol mainly, was, you know, after many years, you know, like I said, I ran a successful business, and then the sort of like 5, maybe 6 years that led up to having issues with alcohol. In that space of time, you know, I already had a successful business, and obviously with that comes a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, none of which I was managing at all. You know, before I had the business, as you know, I used to go to the gym a lot, and so I had things in place, but for some reason, you know, built the business and dropped all of that. Yeah. As a lot of people do, I think. You know, working professionals tend to fall into this rut of work, and then, you know, go home, deal with the family, and then go back to work, and, you know, so there's that. At the same time, I lost my best friend that I grew up with. He committed suicide on holiday. Yep. And I took that very personally, and it's taken quite a while to sort of wrap my head around that. So that happened. Literally a couple of years after that, I lost my mum to cancer. And don't get me wrong, I wasn't never really very close to my mum, necessarily. But it hit me hard in the sense of, you know, my mum was like 57. She was the type of person that, you know, she worked 60 hours a week. And her entire plan was, you know, I'm going to work hard now, retire, and then I'll do what I want. Yep. And of course, she died before she got there. And so whilst I wasn't necessarily connected to my mum massively emotionally for, you know, various different reasons, just observing that, I was like, wow, like, you know, after she died, I was like, wow, like, you know, is this what life is? Like, you just work and then you die, you know? And I'm a very introspective kind of person. So for me, I was honestly just spent so much time, probably too much time, but just spent so much time just asking myself, like, if that's what life is, you work and then you die. Yeah. Like, what's the point? Yeah. Like, literally, what's the point? And that kind of festered in my head for a long time. Obviously, the issues surrounding, like I said, my best friend, because, you know, I just kind of felt like I wasn't there enough for him as I perhaps could have been. And I kind of always felt that, you know, had I done more with him, then, you know, maybe, you know, he might not have ended up the way he did, kind of thing. So all of that was going on.
It just sounds like there was a lot going on in a very, very short space of time. Like, we've sort of brought up a lot, and I do want to take it back to your childhood and your upbringing in a moment, but I think it seems like in a very, very short space of time, you was hyper successful, you was hyper busy, and you gave up the joys of life. The things like you said, you were going to the gym, you were being active, you was busy. It seemed like during all of this period that you're talking about, the things that bring you natural joy, that natural happiness, it sounded like you gave that up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. Like, that's 100% what happened, you know, for lots of reasons. Like, in that same time period, I had kids, as you know. Yeah. You know, and again, like, you know, when you are a working professional, you have kids, and what you tend to do, you put everything else before yourself. Yeah. And yeah, like, that's what happened. So all my hobbies, gym, everything that, you know, I was doing because I enjoyed it or for my own benefit or whatever, just obviously just dropped off. And I think, you know, obviously, well, not I think, I know, like, all of that culminated in, you know, increasing levels of stress, pressure. I'm not sure if depression is the right word, but, you know, feeling bad about either what was done, said, or not done and said about the past, like with my mum and, you know, with my best friend passing away. And obviously having no outlet for that, right? Yeah. And it wasn't a conscious thing to turn to alcohol, like, and this is maybe one of the most important things I wanted to mention today is like just based on my experience, you know, I'm not an expert in addiction or whatever, you know, but I don't think anybody wakes up and decides like, okay, I'm going to get drunk today, or okay, I'm going to whatever, I'm going to take heroin today, or I just want to. Nobody does that.
Yeah.
Right? But like what they do is they want, when they feel bad enough, they want an escape.
Yeah.
Right? And if you've gone through a long period of feeling stressed, anxious, depressed, lonely, whatever the negative feeling is, you want to escape that. And it doesn't take long to realize, like some people turn to comfort eating, right? And they just eat their feelings and you become obese over time and all sorts of other issues. But then other people, like myself, you feel that way and, you have a glass of wine and you feel warm and fuzzy. You have another one and all your thoughts turn off, for example. And then it's like, oh, actually, this feels pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think that's how the roller coaster starts, really. At least that's how it started for me.
And you said there, though, a second ago, but you've sort of come back on yourself. You said depression, but then you said, I didn't feel like it was depression, but then you said depression. So is there a time like you went and seen the GP and they were like, you've got depression, or somebody just said this is what you have before before alcohol came in?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I did go and see the GP. It was, I can't remember the time. I mean, this whole time frame is very fuzzy because, there's probably like a 4-year period where I was just drunk every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's obviously very fuzzy. But it was, it was after my best friend passed away. And I remember going to the GP because I just knew that mentally I wasn't in a good place.
And were you drinking at that time?
Yeah, already.
Okay.
Yeah, at that point. And had an assessment by the GP. I mean, it's quite interesting because the GP diagnosed me as bipolar.
Yeah.
Just for the fact of like one day I could be like really down, the next day I could be completely fine and really productive and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's what the GP thought. Got referred to a psychologist.
Yeah.
Who diagnosed something else. It was, I think, borderline personality disorder, they called it, which sounds horrific. But similar thing, just sort of up and down emotions, no consistency. And then at that, because of what they said, I hired a private counsellor.
Yeah.
And she sort of like diagnosed, she's actually a psychiatrist, but kind of did a lot of counselling. And she diagnosed something called psychophthalmic disorder, which is basically a disorder of the brain. If you look into all the symptoms of each different condition, very similar.
Yeah.
Lots of overlap, and so there was that, and obviously depression plays a role in all of those conditions.
Yeah.
And I think partly why I got diagnosed with basically 3 different things by 3 different people is because, and maybe not a lot of people know this, but like in mental health, the diagnosis is subjective.
Yeah.
So psychiatrists, psychologists, GPs, they use a reference guide called the DSM that tells them, okay, if somebody presents with this, and this, you can diagnose this. And so it's very subjective.
Yeah.
There is no test. There's no blood test.
Yeah.
And I think that's why that happened. But it was very useful for me because I had these 3 different names for maybe this is what's going on, and maybe it has been going on since childhood and it's only reared its head now.
Yeah.
So maybe in me, I work in a science profession, so I took all of those, ran away, investigated all of them, looked at all the research and just trying to understand, okay, like what's going on, where's the overlap?
Yeah.
And that, in a weird way, I know it wouldn't for most people, but in a weird way, really, really helped me. Because I could see, when I was reading these scientific journals or even these books about, people with bipolar tend to do this and react this way. People with, these other issues tend to operate in these sorts of ways in these situations. And I could see myself in the descriptions.
Yeah.
Not 100%, but I could see myself. I was like, okay.
Behaviour traits, you could just pick them out.
Exactly, yeah. And in a weird way that sort of really, really helped. And why I say, why I maybe sounds not too sure about the depression side of it is because, at the time, to my wife, I probably seemed extremely depressed.
Yeah.
On certain days, and then on other days, less so, but I don't know. I guess depression is different for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I've met people that have been diagnosed with major depression, they call it, and you know that seems like a whole different kettle of fish again. You know, and it might be, you know, maybe some mental health professionals that are watching this or listening to this. You know, maybe they can sort of provide more information, because maybe depression is like a catch-all term for, you know, there's obviously going to be different shades of that same condition.
Yeah, so I think from what I hear, and I may be completely wrong, so no doubt I will be, I think it's when it's a consistent feeling of low moods on a consistent basis for over 2 weeks or more.
Yeah.
Because generally, like, you can feel low, you can have a low day, you can have a low day, but then within a day or two you can pick yourself up, or that mood changes and you feel slightly better. But when it's a consistent feeling of down, low, not open to emotions, and a consistent basis of 2 weeks and more, then that's when they sort of look at depression. Hopefully I'm not wrong. Please somebody correct me in the comments down here. Like, hopefully I'm not wrong, but I think that's the way they look at depression. If it's a consistent thing, where we're in that mode, lifestyle now, where people feel low for a day or so, and it's I've got depression.
Yeah.
And where I think with depression is a consistent basis and it doesn't change. So.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, that makes sense, and maybe that kind of validates my being not too sure about it.
Yeah.
Because like I said, obviously there were some days where I just couldn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
For example, but then other days where I would just go into work, I had a really productive day, really happy, chatty, and that wasn't conscious. That wasn't me forcing myself. That was just how I felt.
Yeah.
You know, at the time. So obviously, I mean, there was a significant mental health sort of component to all of that, and you know, like you said before, like just leading up to the whole sort of addiction side of it, there was a lot going on. You know, like I already mentioned, like had kids, best friend committed suicide, lost my mum, stress and the pressure of the business and all of that. And so in some ways, you know, like looking back now, like in some ways, you know, kind of like I don't necessarily feel bad about what happened, because, you know, in some ways I look back and I'm like, wow, like I think a lot of people, if they were put in that same position, I'm not saying everybody would develop the same addiction issues, but you know, I think most people would become malfunctioning on some level.
Yeah.
Whether it's, and this is what's interesting about addiction, is that there are socially accepted addictions.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at, again, you look at the DSM, right? It's what the medical professionals use. You look at the definition of addiction, and the very broad, they've got 11 criteria there, but like the first few, you know, the broad overview of it is, you know, if you kind of using something more than you intended to, and also if you try to give it up but you have intense cravings for it, and you struggle to give it up, and there's a few other ones there. But if you just think about that, right, and you think, like, we all know somebody, actually probably most people, who drink coffee every day, and if they don't drink it, they get headaches. So they don't feel they can give it up. Or mobile phone use, right? Like, if I take your phone off you now and I'll say, listen, mate, I'll give it back to you tomorrow. How do you feel?
I'm not prepared to give up either. I'm not giving up either one of them.
Exactly. So it's really interesting, you know, in terms of addiction. The reason I mention that, though, is like to try to, for everybody listening, is to try to normalize addiction, but not in a sense of like trying to make it okay, because, you know, obviously it's not okay. However, it's really easy to judge people. You know, oh, so-and-so's addicted to heroin, you know, negative connotations. So-and-so's an alcoholic, junkie, or like whatever, right? Like, it's really easy to judge like that. But the reality is we're all addicted to something on some level. The only difference really, and we've talked about this a lot, the only difference really is you've got socially accepted addictions versus not, and then if it has a negative impact on your way of life versus not. And, you know, so coffee addiction, a sugar addiction, a mobile phone addiction, these may or may not have a hugely negative impact on your life, but then, and this was the hard thing for me with alcohol, you know, so for the longest time, like, I was drinking because I wanted, like I've said before, like I wanted to escape how I was feeling, how I was thinking, you know, obviously not coping. But and I'm not sure if this is a medically correct term, I was a very high functioning, I'm not sure if you would say addict, alcoholic, but I was drinking every day. I was drunk every day. But for the longest, nobody knew for the longest time. I ran a business. I've made a lot of money.
Yeah.
I would go to social situations and go to work, and nobody really knew for a while until, obviously it did get to a point eventually where, obviously my wife started noticing.
And how did that creep up on you, that point where it went from being in functioning to be able to go to work, and then all of a sudden not be able to go to work, and then all of a sudden locking yourself away? And how did that change happen? Was it, again, I know you mentioned you don't realise that you drink every day to cope, but that difference of being able to function and then not function, was there ever a stage in your period where you could go from functioning to not be able to function?
Interestingly for me, I never lost the ability to get up and go to work.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
What created red flags in my mind was, I would have arguments with my wife, and she would say, look, like when you came home on Wednesday after work and you were playing with the kids, and she would say, look, it seemed like you were all having fun, but you were obviously drunk.
Yeah.
And honestly, like at the time she was telling me that, which would be after the fact, like the next day or the next few days, I had no recollection what she was talking about at all.
Yeah.
And she would tell me things, and I was like, that, as far as I'm aware, that didn't happen. And it was nothing bad. It's just playing with the kids, having fun and stuff, but I just could not remember it.
How does that make you feel now, though, to knowing that you was going home in that way and being like that around your children?
Yeah, I mean, not great. Not great, but one of the things I've worked hard on is to not beat myself up about the past, and also, like I said, I'm a very introspective person, so analysing, okay, what led me there?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like, I think 8 people out of 10 would struggle with something.
Yeah.
So, like, obviously don't feel great. It wasn't a good period of my life. Learned a lot from it, but I'm not going to sit here and beat myself up about it. If nothing else, the main reason being, like, the windscreen on your car is bigger than the rear view mirror, and I think that is the case for a reason, because it matters more where you're going, what you're going to do next, than it does what you've done.
I love that analogy.
And I think, a big part of depression is people being down and sad about what was.
Yeah.
And the reality is, the stuff in the past, unless you have a time machine, and if you do, let me know, I'll pay any amount of money. But unless you have a time machine, it's gone.
Yeah.
So, like for me, and I would say this to anybody listening or watching, as hard as it might be to accept this, I would say, like, okay, it does not matter what you've done or what you've said in the past, as bad as that might be.
Yeah.
It's gone, it's done, there's nothing you can do. The only way you can even attempt to fix any of that stuff is by what you're going to do next. And that's future-based stuff.
Yeah.
And the good thing about the future is it does not exist. It's not real.
Yeah.
So you get to decide what is in your future.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, what you, like I said, what you do next is the most important thing, and that's kind of, where I started, and, when I kind of started realizing, okay, like, I mean, this has obviously gotten way too out of hand, and all of that, and, so, because, like, people often ask the question, because I talk openly about all of this stuff, and people often ask about, like, where do you get started? And everybody thinks to make change in your life, you have to overhaul your life.
Yeah.
But my experience tells me that you just have to take the next step.
Yeah.
And
that sort of puts me in the question, because with Seek Recovery Network and Turning Point working together with the podcast Under the Influence, and you know about Turning Point because I work there, and we have to get the plug in for Turning Point, of course. But I'm guessing along this period of going through your addiction, did you ever hear about Turning Point or know about Turning Point or know about help that was available for you? Because I know that you didn't ever engage in treatment. I know that you felt alone in this period. It felt like there was only one person that could fix it, and it was you. So what was like? Did you ever get referred? Did you ever asked about it? Did you know about it? I'm just quite curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I did know about it. Obviously, I knew about it from you because you work there. We talk a lot. It was mentioned by my mental health nurse, who had assigned to me for a very long time, and he mentioned it. So I was aware of it. Obviously, he mentioned it's a self-referral, so go away, refer yourself, etc. I went away, didn't refer myself, and to be honest, in the beginning, the main reason why I didn't refer myself in the beginning, even though I knew this issue was an issue, right? I knew it. I was like, drinking all the time. I feel like I need to drink all the time. But equally, it was an issue. But still, when he mentioned it, I still didn't refer myself. And I think the main reason was because at that point in time, I didn't feel like anybody was listening. Nobody. And I think a lot of people listening that have sort of addiction issues of any kind will maybe relate to this, because at that moment in time, everybody around me, and don't get me wrong, everybody around me was, like my wife, my friends, etc. Everybody was trying to do the right thing. But the approach was and is to try to almost like be critical of you, to try to shame you into doing what they want you to do. At that moment in time, at no point did anybody ever ask me, listen, I noticed you've been drinking a lot. What's going on? What's happening? And at that point, me and you hadn't really, we'd been disconnected for a few years. This was even before, and I'm sure we'll get to that point. But at that point, the GP, the psychologist, nobody at that point was interested. Or at least that's how it seemed to me. Like, nobody had asked the question. So in my mind, it was like, nobody's even interested in what's going on up here for me. All I kept... So I remember going to the mental health nurse one day, and my wife came with me, because she wanted... at that point, she didn't trust me. So she wanted to make sure that I went and all of that stuff, which is awful in and of itself, because it's like, wow, like I'm a grown man. And I remember like the mental health nurse going, listen, if you're drinking because you feel anxious or you feel low, have you considered exercising? That's what he said to me. And at the time, I hadn't exercised in 10 years. Literally felt like shit every single day. All I was trying to do was escape that feeling every single day. And when he said, have you considered exercise? I knew he was not, I don't know if he was not paying attention, and there's nothing against him. I just think that's the default that everybody goes to. It's like, so-and-so's an alcoholic, so-and-so's addicted to drugs, So the family or the close friends, everybody feels like, if I just point out, you're going to have a heart attack. Or these kinds of negative things, then maybe that'll make them realize. Like, it doesn't make people realize. It actually makes them feel worse. So the ironic thing is, because this is what it did for me, like my wife having to go at me every day. Oh, you've been drinking again. You shouldn't be drinking. I've told you. Remember, all this kind of stuff, right? It's like, the ironic thing about that is like, that would make me feel even worse, which would make me drink even more.
and that's what I did want to touch upon in childhood, which I've completely missed. And I think we probably won't be able to do that. But I think from knowing about your childhood, it was like being a child again. It's like being told what you need to do rather than it coming from you.
Million percent.
And that's where that whole ethos of, you should do this, you should stop, you should do this now, and you should do this for your children, and you should do this for everybody else, and you should do this for me. It sounds like that. And I think I always talk about it a lot in recovery and addiction and how to move forward, is like the first in addiction, in recovery, the first thing you need to do is be slightly selfish. And the first time for change, and when you can be prepared for change, is when you do it in your heart for yourself. And once you start doing it for yourself and you become selfish and put yourself at the top, I think that's how it can be successful.
1,000,000%. I'll add to that. I think that's the only way you can be successful.
Yeah.
And so I think selfishness has a negative connotation to it. We all think being selfish is bad. However, the reality is, like, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
No.
When you go on a plane, what's the safety advice? The plane is going down. We're probably going to crash. Put your air mask on before you help your family, because if not, you will die.
Yes.
And then you can't help them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
Apply that to life.
Yeah.
So, over the years, I've thought about this as like strategic selfishness, to try to soften it a bit, because everybody thinks being selfish is negative, but it's, in this case, it's not.
Yeah.
It's like, look after yourself first, because that's the only way. And I work with, I'm a dietitian. I work for the NHS. I work with a lot of people that are struggling with obesity, diabetes, all sorts of stuff. And I tell them the same thing. It's like, because very often people will, they'll serve their kids first and they'll put themselves last and feed themselves poor quality food, etc. And I have to remind them, like, look, like, unless you take care of yourself first, right, you cannot possibly show up in the best way for everybody else. You can't.
Yep.
That analogy, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if I don't fill my cup up first, or you don't fill yours up first, you can't show up for your family, neither can I.
Yep.
And so like, it definitely can't work without the selfishness.
Yeah.
Like I said, it has a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But going back to sort of why I didn't engage in treatment, that was the main reason why. Of like, obviously at that point I wasn't putting myself first, and I didn't feel like anybody was listening. I didn't feel like anybody was interested. Yeah. So then the idea of engaging with yet another service who's again going to tell me, you're such an idiot, you should be doing this, but you're not. Look at you, such a failure, right? Like, why was I going to do that?
Yeah.
None of us would do it. And the equivalent is, and hopefully this is simple enough for everybody, but the equivalent is, if you were to follow an obese person around every day and just be like, hey, fatty, why are you fat?
Yeah.
Eat less. Put the fork down. What are you doing? You're going to die. You're going to have a heart attack. You're going to be diabetic.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, definitely.
However, when it comes to addiction, alcohol, drugs, etc., that is what the family do.
Yeah.
That's what all the friends do. And don't get me wrong, they're not doing it for malicious reasons. Everybody's doing it with the best of intentions. However, the approach is completely wrong.
Yeah. And so for that, for our listeners that may be family members, our viewers that may be wives that are supporting the partner, our viewers that may be husbands that are supporting the wife, what advice would you give them from your own experience of that?
There's one word that comes to mind, and that's empathy.
Yeah.
And, all empathy is trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So, for me in work, I deal with, people that, like I said, sometimes have a BMI of 50, 60, and they have to have surgery and stuff. And the very first thing I'm trying to do is understand what's going on for them.
Yeah.
And I know you do this in your work.
Yeah,
So you talk about it all the time. It's like, okay, but what's going on for you?
Yeah.
What's led up to this point? Like what, like I said at the very beginning, like there's something missing or something being masked.
Yeah.
Right? And the masked is, we're trying to cover up some negative feelings. For a lot of people, it's trauma or depression or anxiety or various combinations of all of that. And sometimes it can start with something that's missing. Maybe like we've talked about, like, at the point that led up to me drinking a lot was like, okay, I had nothing that I was doing that I was actually enjoying for myself. It's just work and family. Yeah. That's it. So there's a lot missing there.
Huge.
Do you know what I mean? There's a lot missing there. So...
And I guess that sort of takes me to the second stage, with it being wellness restart, refresh this month. There's a lot of people that probably had overdone it during Christmas period, overdone it during the New Year's. And I think for you, I feel quite privileged and honoured because I didn't see you during this period. And I feel like, and I think oh, well, I didn't really, me and Mike would never really been that close. His associates, his friends of friends. And then I think that moment that I seen you, I think it was middle of COVID. And you just come in and I was like, this person isn't the same person that I met before. Isn't the same person that I dealt with before, or isn't the person that I knew before. It was like everything was so down. You was so low. You didn't want to live. You were in a situation where I would probably say close to suicidal and close to thinking of ways of ending your life. When I first seen you that time. And it was a really hard time. And for that day, it was like it was a blessing. Like I was just there. Somehow I was there in the gym during COVID, and we started getting to talk to you. And during this period, we started hearing. There was one thing that you kept talking about over and over again when we was talking, and you were telling me about how shit life was, how bad everything is. And there was one thing that every time we spoke about your past and fitness, and your past and the lifestyle and food, and we spoke about your past and the things that you spoke about, food, nutrition, training. That's when you sparked up.
Right.
That's when you started. That's that. Your well-being reset there.
Yeah.
Like I could see the passion in your eyes, and I think that's what was the change of your lifestyle, wasn't it? To actually start changing the things you do, because you still didn't enter treatment, which I'm never going to forgive you now, which I'm never going to let you down for. But you still didn't enter treatment, but within a short space of time, you started making them little changes. I think you started putting yourself first. Straight away first. And then your changes that you made. But what were the changes that you made to try to come out of this way of lifestyle you was in?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I guess just to give people the full context, so remind me of what you've just asked if I forget, but just to give people the full context of the story. Obviously, lockdown had happened.
Yeah.
You know, I was running my business at that time from home, still dealing with all these issues that were going on, the stress of being at home, kids are at home 24/7, etc. You know, a mutual friend of ours owns a gym that was empty, the office was empty. He was gracious enough to say, listen, you know, just go and use the office, it's fine, you know, get some headspace, etc. And that's kind of where that started, and obviously that's how I ran into you at the gym, the empty gym. And yeah, like, you know, I still remember to that day, and I would completely agree with what you said, like that probably was the spark, because that was the conversation of, I remember you asking the question, well, what do you do for you? I remember just looking at you completely confused, like, I don't understand the question.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And, you know, we had the whole conversation, and you said, like, you know, you used to train and all that kind of stuff, like, you used to enjoy it, like, do you enjoy it now? I was like, I have no idea. Like, no idea. And, you know, I remember leaving that conversation with you on that day, just thinking, like, you know, like, yeah, like, he's right. Like, I don't, what do I do for me? You know, I'm running my business, obviously during lockdown, you know, and during lockdown, you know, my business took a downturn, as many businesses did. So I was, like, hyper stressed about, like, is the business going to survive? And, you know, but still realizing, well, what am I doing for myself? There wasn't anything, you know, and that was it took me a few days of just mulling that over to be like, wow, like Dill's actually right for a change.
It doesn't happen very often. I take them few wins. I'll take the wins.
But to your question of like, well, what were the changes that you started doing? Well, you know, like I've got, you know, a background in science, and, you know, already knew quite a bit about behavior change. And so I knew that trying to change everything all at once it's going to fail.
Yeah.
And it does. Like, we'll see it now, like, you know, January, a lot of people, new year, new me kind of stuff. They'll start a diet, join the gym, do everything all at once. By February or March, they'll give up. Yeah. That'll be the end of that, right? So, you know, I've known that from experience. I've known that from the scientific research, from all of my education and stuff. So I made a deal with myself. Okay, Dill's got a point. Did used to enjoy training. So let's just start very small. And at that moment in time, I didn't even decide to stop drinking.
Yeah.
I didn't.
I remember them times you coming into the office and I was like, he doesn't seem himself.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem right. We had separate offices at this point. And we're like, he doesn't seem right. And then I'm like, he's getting into his car. I'm sure he's drunk. And I wasn't.
I shouldn't laugh, but
Yeah, but it was at that stage where I was like, what do I do here? Like, this is, like, is he drunk? Is he not drunk? I was like, is it something else? Because I didn't know, it could have been multiple of different things, but I just couldn't relate it. Me being so knowledgeable on alcohol, I just couldn't relate it to what it actually was. I was like, is that just his behaviour? Because I've not seen you for so long. Is that just his behaviour? Is his mood tripped? Is he drinking? It could have been multiple different things, but yeah.
And I think that's how it is for a lot of sort of working professional type people. That will be very high functioning with this, not only with alcohol but with various different drugs and stuff. That like they will be able to do it and go to work and stay functional and stuff. And that's how I was at the time. But I made a deal with myself. Right, I'm going to start small. After our discussion, and the gym was empty, so I just thought I'm just gonna in the very beginning I was just like, right, I'm just gonna walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes every day. That's it. Nothing else.
Yeah.
If I wanna just go and carry on drinking, whatever. That it was that small, like so small. The deal with myself was like, it's got to be so small that I can't not do it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And that was where I started, and kind of did that for a few weeks. And then obviously off the back of our conversation again, I just kind of kept building on that, and as kind of started sort of messing around with woodworking type stuff again, just trying to investigate, well, what else can I add to my life that I might enjoy, and at that time still kind of drinking, but what I noticed was the more started with a treadmill 10 minutes a day, then that became 20 minutes a day, then it was 30 minutes a day, then eventually I started lifting a few weights, and it just built up and built up.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening over time was I did feel better.
Yeah.
I remember, I was like, oh yeah, actually this does feel good, and I do feel better. And as that increased, like the training, the woodworking, all of a sudden I've got stuff going on that I'm looking forward to, and it's not alcohol.
Yep.
And just without trying too much, like the alcohol just came down, came down, and came down, until obviously took a while. Maybe so that started in 2020. By the end of 2020, I wasn't drinking at all.
Yeah.
I'd lost literally a bunch of weight. I'd learned a bunch of new skills in woodworking and stuff. But at that point already, I'd had enough going on where, and this is an important point for people, I think, so I had enough going on at that point where drinking wasn't really worth it anymore.
Yeah.
Why? Because I was so engaged in the woodworking that if I was drunk, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I'm lifting weights and I'm going on the treadmill, and I really enjoyed how that felt. And obviously if I'm really drunk, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And that's an important point for people, I think, because if you read all of the habit, or all the books on habit.
Better 28.
Yeah, so we'll get onto that in a sec. But if you read because this is what I did, if you read all the books on habit formation, they all say you cannot remove a bad habit. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Why? Because what a habit is that your brain builds neural pathways.
Yeah. To
sort of automate behaviors. So if you drink your coffee every day, you'll do it on autopilot, driving the car, if you've been driving for a while, etc. So you can't delete a bad habit, but what you can do is replace it with someone else.
Yes.
You can, and that's you're thinking back now, that's what I did. Drinking here, weightlifting, cardio, woodworking down here, and then as that goes up, that comes down. Do you know what I mean? And that's exactly what happened. And how I also try to gamify all of that. And again, this kind of comes back to my experience in the fitness industry and all of that kind of stuff. Of just trying to make it fun. So you just mentioned the Better 28. That's just something that I literally just invented that year just to try to gamify it. So I had 3 things that I wanted to do every single day.
Yep.
Obviously, 28 things a week, and just, sort of map it across the month. And once I'd done those things, I would just tick it off in the box.
And that was exercise, food,
and focus. So it's food, focus, and fitness was the thing. So 3 Fs: food, focus, and fitness. So the focus one throws people off, but really what it is something for your mental health.
Yeah.
Which for me at the time, I was like, right, treadmill.
Yeah.
lifting weights, or I'm going to do some woodworking.
Yeah.
So on any given day, it's like, am I going to get on the treadmill? If not, am I going to lift weights? If not, am I going to do some woodworking?
Yeah.
Because at the time, that was mentally what made me feel good.
Yeah, and that focus can be anything that just keeps your mind occupied.
Literally anything.
Meditation, yoga.
Yeah, it could be reading a book, going swimming. It could be doing some meditation. It could be literally anything that benefits you mentally.
And same with food. Food can be just anything where you reduce or add drink more water or eat more protein, or it can be very something. It doesn't have to be have 5 great meals a day. It can be just something minute.
Exactly. And it's actually, I would argue, based on my experience, it's better if it is tiny.
Yeah.
If it's so small, it seems like, that's too easy.
Yeah.
If that's your reaction, that's the best place to start.
Yes.
Because you start with this tiny little thing, tiny little thing, tiny little thing, tiny little thing. Everybody's heard of, hopefully, the compounding effect. You know, you invest a little bit of money, and a little bit, and a little bit, and a little bit, and eventually all of that multiplies.
Yeah.
You know, like the 5% investment by the end of the year starts looking at like a 75% return.
Yep.
You know, and it's the same with behavior change. You invest a little bit into yourself, going back to the being selfish, because all of these things were for me now.
Yeah.
You know, the strategic selfishness. So it's like me investing in myself.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, if we all think of ourselves as businesses, if you don't invest in your business, it's not going to succeed.
Yeah.
Same for you as an individual. If you don't invest in yourself and doing things that you enjoy, regardless of what it is, you know, is investing in yourself, taking care of yourself, eating well, you know, exercising, all that stuff's great, but ultimately you need to enjoy it. And that was probably the biggest lesson in all of this for me in terms of behavior change and all of that is like, and oddly enough, you know, since then I've read a lot more books around behavior change, and you know, it's taken researchers like 50 years to come to that conclusion of, you know, well, we can force people to change, but if they don't enjoy it, they're not going to stick to it. Yeah. You know, diet, etc. And I think this definitely applies to addiction. Like, if you don't enjoy what you're going to replace the addiction with, you're not going to stick to it. And if you're not replacing addiction with it, and you just, you know, like if somebody's going to try to give up drugs or alcohol, and they're just sat around watching Jeremy Kyle, they're not going to give up. They're not. You've got nothing.
And that's it's great because we are coming close to the end of the podcast, and it's sort of leading in that direction. I think I'd like a message from you to potentially workers. They're out there at Turning Point. They're out there at all services, and also service users as well. Is there one message, a bit of advice that you could offer them? As what they can as a worker, what you could potentially do to allow your service users to succeed, or is it anything that people can do to allow themselves to succeed?
I mean, it's hard to pick one thing to cover both people, but I think the main thing that I would want to stress is empathy. Yeah. So for the people with the addiction issues, have empathy for yourself. You know, whatever trauma you're dealing with, depression, and whatever you're trying to mask, like, most people would struggle with that, you know, and the addiction would, like I said, it will show up in various different ways. So don't beat yourself up about the fact that you're in this hole. Many people would be. Yeah. And the sooner they can get past that, and like I said, the windscreen's bigger than the rearview mirror. Yes. You know, so focus there. And even for people like yourself that work with people like myself with the issues, approach them with empathy. Yeah. Don't approach them trying to tell them, look, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that, X, Y, Z. Approach them with maybe even just questions. If you have empathy for somebody, you're just curious, like, what's happening? Yeah. You know, if your best friend is struggling, if your first response, or your child, your first response is like, oh, what just happened? Why are you upset? Yeah. And I think if you approach the addict with that mentality, everything, like I said, the person with the issue won't be as defensive. Yeah. They'll open up more. They'll be more honest. They'll feel listened to. Yeah. Like, I didn't feel listened to, but they will feel listened to. And all of a sudden, you're kind of meeting each other in the middle a lot more, rather than, you know, one person feel like they're getting told off, the other person feel like they're screaming, but nobody's listening. Exactly. And I think so. Empathy, 100%. Yeah.
And it has been a pleasure having you here, Mike. And no doubt this is part one. I'd like to do part two, part three. There was so much I wanted to get, and I've not been able to get.
Yeah, we could talk.
And maybe we do this in the office every other week.
Yeah.
But I think with our podcast name, Under the Influence, I've got one question that I'd like to ask you. Our last question is: what are you under the influence today?
That's a very good question, and it goes right back to what I mentioned right at the start, is everybody's addicted to something. You look at the definition of addiction, everybody, caffeine, mobile phone, etc. For me right now, it's the gym.
Yep.
100% the gym.
Brilliant.
I know if I go to the gym, I'm okay. And I've even experimented with this. On days of not going to the gym for various reasons, I've noticed I'm not okay. So it's the gym. And, in that sense, maybe not all addiction is a problem. If an addiction creates positive outcomes in your life, like me going to the gym, I have more muscle, less body fat, I'm healthier than I've ever been.
Yep.
I feel great. And all of that, in that sense, addiction's not necessarily a bad thing.
Perfect. Mike's under the influence of the gym. So that's the end of our episode today, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.